Hey guys, I promised you I'd record a video on the themes lesson that we went over. For this lesson, you're going to want to have your To Kill a Mockingbird packet opened up to the very last page to the document entitled To Kill a Mockingbird Part 1 Themes and Lessons Learned. If you recall, this is the exact worksheet that we used when we did this activity in class. You should also have your To Kill a Mockingbird with you opened up. And it helps if you have a notebook handy or even post-it notes so that you can make some quick notes. Now the first thing I want to show you is this document here. This is the document that we put together as a class, but you guys will notice that the answers that are here are from periods 2, periods 4, and period 6. So depending on which period you had my class during the day, you may notice some new notes or some notes that we didn't go over. And that's why I'm recording this video lecture, just as a recap of what we did in class, and also to inform you of what was done in some other classes. If you want to access this document, you can go onto my Final Site page, click on Resources, and once the Resources page will open up, you'll notice that there's a To Kill a Mockingbird Notes folder right here. Click on that, and this document can be found under the Themes and Discussions. By the way, if you want to go back and look at some of the previous chapters, we have some notes here on previous chapters that you guys generated. But let's go ahead and start with the themes worksheet. Now, if you remember, the numbers on the worksheet that you see right here, numbers 1 and 2, correspond with the themes on your themes worksheet. That's why I have that little note up here. And I know it's a little bit confusing, but I'll do my best to walk you through it. If you'll notice, the page numbers don't correlate. If you have a purple book, I'll have taken note that the pages occur in the purple book. Or if you have the tan book, some of the page numbers may be different, but I'll do my best to inform you of what's what. The first theme over here is to understand someone and the things they do. You have to look at things from their point of view. The examples that you brought up first during period 2 are on page 128. We spoke about the death of Mrs. Dubose. Now, if you recall, what's really important about Mrs. Dubose in terms of her role thematically in the novel is that although she is a fairly detestable woman, her courage and her determination to die free of her addiction to morphine are what's important here. It takes the children quite a bit of time to look at things from Mrs. Dubose's perspective, but with the help of Atticus, they are able to see Mrs. Dubose in a new light. And hopefully, you as a reader can understand how we can learn courage from her and how we can learn her perspective of the world. I'm not saying that you guys need to think about her as a wonderful person. She was, after all, quite racist and incredibly rude to the children, but you can at least see things from a different perspective. Another wonderful character that illustrates this is Dolphus Raymond. Everyone believes that Dolphus Raymond is an alcoholic, but in reality, we find out on page 228, you have the tan book, and as you see here on page 200, if you have the purple book, that Dolphus Raymond himself says that people would not understand him if he simply stated that he prefers the company of black folks. Here we see that when we look at Dolphus Raymond's point of view, that we can understand why he chooses to marry a black woman as a white man and why he chooses the company of black folks over white folks. Now, theme number 2 here was don't judge people by your own standards, especially when you're more privileged than they are. Walter Cunningham Jr. is a wonderful example of this. In the tan book here, this is chapter 23, if you're trying to figure this out for your other book. It may be page 225 in the purple book. We see that Aunt Alexandra calls Walter Cunningham trash. This sends Scout running off into her room crying. And if you remember, there's a wonderful scene where Jem comforts Scout and makes her feel better about it. Here is an example of Aunt Alexandra judging Walter Cunningham by her own standards. But both Jem and Scout are able to reflect on this scene and realize that just like they had learned with Walter Cunningham Jr. in part 1 of the book, that he is not as privileged as they are, and they're able to look at things from his perspective. So that's a good example of Aunt Alexandra judging someone by her own standards. Mayella Ewell is another great example of this. We've spoken about her time and time again. I won't spend too much time on her. She's a very easy character to judge, but When we look back at the trial, I believe it's chapter 18 that focuses on her part of her testimony, and chapters 19, Tom Robinson's testimony, reveal the abuse, both physical and sexual, the fear, loneliness, and the ignorance of Mayella Ewell. And once we understand that point of view, perhaps we can understand why she is the way she is. And though it's easy to judge her, we later understand that if we look at things from a different perspective, we can see and understand why she does the things that she does. Lesson number 3 is excellent. Fight your battles mentally, not physically. Now, there's so many examples of this. One of the primary examples is obviously Atticus fighting the trial, and in a sense, fighting racism through the trial, and fighting the racism of the Maycomb community by defending Tom Robinson. But the lynch mob is another really interesting scene where we can see this come to a head. In chapter 3, Scout makes Walter Cunningham Sr. feel ashamed. She's really simply trying to show courtesy and respect, which is actually number 8. The theme for number 8, show courtesy and respect for others always. Don't let others get to you. She's simply trying to be polite and respectful. But what she inadvertently does is winds up fighting her battle mentally and rather than physically. And she shames the men in the lynch mob when they walk away. Theme number 4, things aren't always fair. Sometimes you don't get to tell your side of the story. Tom Robinson, it's really interesting. Many of you guys expressed the idea that because Tom Robinson is black, he is never quote unquote heard. Robinson essentially is convicted before he is even tried for the case. We know that he is completely innocent of the charges, but because of the racist, institutionalized racism of Maycomb, we find that despite Tom Robinson telling his story, he is found guilty. This is a clear example of not being able to tell your side of the story and things not being fair. Mayella Ewell is perhaps the best example in part 2. She never tells her part of the story. Yes, she does testify, but there's examples of that prove Mayella is clearly being coached here by her father. And don't forget, there is this fear that she has of her father. There's the abuse from her father that prevents her from ever telling her side of the story. Again, we're not justifying her behavior here. She's clearly doing something wrong. She's clearly trying to get Tom Robinson convicted, but we can at least understand where she's coming from and why she does what she does. If you haven't picked up on it yet, the Mockingbird metaphor is an overarching extended metaphor that goes throughout the novel. You guys have thrown together many different examples of quote-unquote mockingbirds from the novel. Some of you guys have argued that Robinson, because he's helpless and very kind, is a mockingbird. Remember, the lesson here, number 5, is it's wrong to harm things that don't harm you. And clearly, Atticus presents this metaphor when he says that shoot all the blue jays you want, but it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. There are so many examples here. Some students argue, as you've argued here, that Gem and Scout, in fact, are mockingbirds. They are discriminated against. Perhaps Calpurnia is a mockingbird because of the flack she takes from Aunt Alexandra. We spoke in great detail about the loss of innocence that the children experience. And in many ways, children here are mockingbirds. So they are helpless and harmless, but the world of the child their bubble is being burst, if you will. However, I want you to keep in mind that Tom Robinson is perhaps the most obvious mockingbird. And now that you've read more of the novel, keep in mind how Boo Radley perhaps is a mockingbird. Look carefully at chapters, I believe it's chapter 29 or chapter 30, where Atticus and Scout have a wonderful conversation on the front porch and discuss the fact that perhaps Boo Radley and bringing him out into the limelight would be like killing a mockingbird. Number 6 here, if you possess an unfair advantage over something, it's wrong to use it. Many students express the idea that the Ewells, Mr. Ewell and Mayella Ewell, are using their advantage of being white to wrongfully accuse Robinson. And they successfully use this advantage, but at a dire consequence to themselves and, of course, to Tom Robinson. You can reference the trial for this. Another great example actually occurs in chapter 12 when Calpurnia brings the children to the First Purchase Baptist Church. Here we see that although Calpurnia is literate and speaks quote-unquote properly, Cal does not like using this advantage over her black peers. There's a wonderful quote, it's on pages 124 to 126 in the purple book. You'll have to find it yourselves if you have the tan book, where Calpurnia explains why she doesn't use this advantage. Number 7, don't assume you already know everything there is to know about a person. There's more than meets the eye. Really, guys, uh, this really directly correlates to lesson number 1. To understand someone and the things they do, you have to look at things from their point of view. Look at Mayella Ewell here. Look at Dolphus Raymond here. I mean, you have some notes over here so you can see some exact passages to find this. But there are many characters that this can be applied to. Think of Burris Ewell. Think of Mayella Ewell, Walter Cunningham Jr., uh, Miss Caroline Fisher. The last one that we covered here together as a class is number 8. Show courtesy and respect towards others always. Uh, think about the scene where Atticus treats Mayella with respect, but because she has never been treated with any kind of respect, she believes that Atticus is mocking her. Also, keep in mind how respectful Tom Robinson is during the trial. Don't forget that he's black, and this is the behavior that's expected of him. Throughout part 2, if you look carefully, Scout is constantly correcting herself, trying to change her ways, if you will. And there are so many examples of treating others with courtesy and respect and how it gains new ground for many of the characters. Think about how Scout treated Walter Cunningham Sr. with courtesy and respect during the lynch mob scene, and this is able to diffuse everything that happens. This directly correlates to theme number 9. When people insult you, they only show how poor they are. So, of course, you get to see the opposite side of the coin. Go ahead and find examples there. And the last one, which we didn't cover, is true courage is facing something inside, not outside yourself. True courage is taking the challenge, even when you know you may fail. Great example here, Mrs. Dubose. She knows she's going to die, but she fights her battle anyway. Atticus Finch knows that in all likelihood he will lose the trial and Tom Robinson will be convicted. This doesn't stop him from doing his best to defend Tom Robinson. Um, Again, there's so many places where you can layer these lessons and these themes. I hope you've found some additional ones yourself. Take your time, listen to this lesson as many times as you like, as many times as you can. Look at the notes. If you have questions on Monday, please come see me. I hope this was helpful.